Preview.
UFOs have seen a resurgence among the mainstream media.
Because he says he was abducted by aliens 45 years ago. Calvin Parker joins me now.
Since the New York Times and Washington Post published their first articles on the 2004 Nimitz encounter, they and the rest of the media have continued to publish articles relating to the topic, with most of the New York Times articles written collectively by Pentagon correspondent Helene Cooper, New York Times journalist Ralph Blumenthal, and UFO author and journalist for the Huffington Post Leslie Kean, all of whom are urging the world to take the phenomenon seriously. After the story hit, Blumenthal went on MSNBC to reveal that the Pentagon UAP program did not, contrary to what many claim, end in 2012.
It really has continued, we found out.
So what's been going on? And why have they not publicized the fact that it has continued?
Well, it's a controversial program.
Claiming the Pentagon program has attained materials from these objects and is currently studying their properties.
So they have made
what
some
type
progress.
Of material?
They don't know. They're studying it, but it's some kind of compound that they don't recognize.
But if all this is actually true, how'd they get it? It's possible that we'll get some form of this answer soon.
Well, yeah, when I reflect upon what we've been able to accomplish, I sit here and kind of go, yay and hey.
It's likely the material Blumenthal was referencing, among apparently many other forms of material from unrelated events, are currently being analyzed by To the Stars Academy, a public benefit corporation whose team includes 5 insiders who were high up in the CIA, NSA, Lockheed Martin, and recently added Dr. Norm Kahn, whose experience in the CIA spans over 30 years, all of whom participants in the newly founded ATOM Research Project, which stands for Acquisition and Data Analysis of Materials.
We remain, cautiously optimistic, right? And we're going to leave no stone unturned. And so far, the stones that we have turned over, some have yielded some really pretty fantastic results.
But in the minds of many, this process of so-called disclosure from To the Stars has all but fizzled out.
There's a lot of people who are impatient for information, and rightfully so. I get it. We're human beings. We want our information. We want it now, and why are you holding back? But sometimes you have to let the right people in the right positions digest information, right? Sometimes you can't expect a 10-course meal to be digested all in one bite. It just can't happen.
We'll have to wait and see if they follow through with something substantial. I doubt the materials they have will turn out to be completely benign, given how foolish a move it would be to get everyone's hopes up only to say months later, oops, it's nothing. That said, this is the same group who claimed this was a picture of a UFO, only for the public to find out later it was a balloon. It's highly unlikely the ATOM Project will be revealing extraterrestrial materials, but rather metamaterials, which is still interesting if indeed they were found on an unknown vehicle. But it does lead to a much simpler terrestrial but still mysterious explanation of what humans created it and where. Since the New York Times article, Fox News appears to have dedicated more time than any other network to discussing this topic. They even spent time talking to a supposed abductee, Calvin Parker.
What were they in? Were they in some sort of spacecraft?
And why is Jesse so serious? Jesse Waters is arguably one of the most cynical media pundits out there, yet his composure here is strange. It's as if he's interviewing a Russian diplomat. That's weird. One would expect the opposite, as he must inwardly know that the questions he's having to ask sound absurd.
What did they do to you when they took you up in space, or wherever they took you?
Tucker Carlson is another example of a Fox News pundit who all of a sudden thinks we need to take UFOs seriously.
That's terrifying. So, these are aircraft unidentified that are operating in very close proximity to the U.S. military.
Treating those involved with To the Stars with sincerity and respect.
And the government isn't responding adequately, and I hope you keep sounding the alarm on this. I hope this tape goes everywhere. Thank you for your bravery. This just seems like a story that we should be covering much more than we do, and I hope you will come back. You seem sober and believable, and I appreciate it.
Why, thank you very much, Tucker.
Thanks. Leslie, thank you for coming on. It's an honor to have you.
Thanks a lot, Tucker. I appreciate your interest in this.
Disclosure is the process where sections in the government coordinate with respected journalists, credentialed institutions, in the mainstream media to slowly unveil information they've kept secret about UFOs. Others call it confirmation, given how much they claim to already know regarding the phenomenon. So you could ask yourself, is it true of your experience that you've been seeing more connections lately between the topic of UFOs and respected journalists, credentialed institutions in the mainstream media? This leads many to claim we're in the middle of disclosure, but I would like to add that the New York Times has consistently broken stories in the past that changed the public's perception of the world. It's not necessarily that some elite group of influencers are putting out disclosure, but that the environment for discussing UFOs has been made easier for those in the spotlight. But even if that's true, a pertinent question still exists. With it being almost a year later, why did the Pentagon do this at all? The public didn't have to know. Or did we? I continue to remain unconvinced of this speculation. Too often one prefers conspiracy over a more conventional explanation. It's true that false flags have happened in the past. The Gulf of Tonkin, Operation Northwoods, Project TP Ajax are all verified examples of government conspiracy, with the CIA being at the heart of every American false flag event. The theory goes that To the Stars is set up to create an us versus them threat narrative.
Threat identification program.
And that the reason we're seeing what appears to be UFO disclosure is because elite sections of the intelligence agencies are setting the stage for an orchestrated and fake alien invasion in order to pursue a particular agenda. They will use top secret technology, some of which they claim has been back engineered by ET craft against the public, then blame it on outside invaders and build from there. Jim Simivan is arguably the leader of To the Stars. He's also been a spy for the CIA for 25 years, with many claiming he's never actually stopped his clandestine operations.
I worked as a spy for 25 years in the CIA's clandestine service. Had a wonderful career there, enjoyed it very, very much. Was lucky enough to be a member of the Senior Intelligence Service. I currently consult with the intelligence community on a part-time basis.
That's pretty sketchy. These guys must be aware that they're stepping into a community of people who detest the intelligence agencies of the US. But the frivolity with which Jim Simivan admits to his long career as a spy makes him seem oblivious to this. Or maybe he does know the public would react skeptically to it. I don't know. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I trust these people. I've criticized them in the past, suggesting they could be operating as tools for disinformation. I'm saying the fake alien invasion narrative is grounded in nothing firm. One can be skeptical of To the Stars without buying into the false flag hypothesis. I also find myself in the middle of an online culture that gives the CIA far too much credit. Contrary to what most think, the CIA has not shown themselves to be very good at committing false flags without getting caught. Many also seem to conflate certain unethical CIA top-secret projects, like MKUltra mind control, with successful results. MKUltra was controversial, not because they were successfully brainwashing people, but because of its violations of human rights. The organization was participating in what could easily be called the torture of humans, even the molesting of children. It's terrifying, but it doesn't mean the CIA can control your thoughts. It means what they did was completely immoral, and for something that was never supposed to see the light of day and be top secret, we sure do know a lot about it. Although most records were destroyed in 1973 by order of CIA Director Richard Helms, more information is still coming forward, even this month, of the atrocious methods conducted by the CIA. Don't get me wrong, the CIA as an organization is sophisticated and clever, and I'm certainly not claiming they can't keep a secret well. I'm saying that I disagree with the deification of their influence and results. Just because they're sophisticated and intelligent doesn't mean they're mythological global puppet masters, unless you want to argue that they have committed false flags in secret and gotten away with it without being caught, and even done so recently, like the Las Vegas shooting, for instance. Well, I can't argue with that, as it's unfalsifiable. I can say, however, that if you just look at their track record, it's not irrational to see that in general, there are people who make all the same mistakes every other institution, secretive or otherwise, does. Is it really that difficult to grant that sometimes someone really does go crazy and shoot everyone? And imagine what it would take to pull off an alien invasion. I mean, where do I even begin? So I think it's relatively safe to say that if an event actually did happen where our world collided with what appeared to be aliens, it probably wasn't from Luis Elizondo, but something else. It surprises me how many still think this is a topic best left to the fringes of the internet and boomer UFO conferences. Two YouTubers whose content I enjoy, and two people whom I respect, Computing Forever and Armored Skeptic, focus only on taking down the low-hanging fruit, missing the forest from the trees. They take down simple fallacies, saying things like, just because it's a UFO doesn't mean it's an alien.
People will ask, well Dave, if it's not a UFO, then what is it? What's your explanation? Well, I don't know for sure, but if you're going to substitute a lack of evidence with a God of the Gaps argument and say, if in doubt, aliens...
Which is a non-argument, because those who make it fail to understand that by making it, you're actually acknowledging the phenomenon, just not a particular explanation of said phenomenon. Of course, UFO does not mean alien. Dave admits he doesn't know for sure. Then strawmans an explanation I didn't make. All one has to grant is that occasionally we humans have seen objects in the sky and didn't know what it was. That's it. And one would have to lie to themselves or be delusional about the world not to grant that. UFOs are a continually reported thing, with the vast majority, upwards of 95% when scrutinized, being drones, flares, balloons, meteors, blimps, abnormal weather phenomena, and a host of other benign things. This is a fact. It's also a fact that the remaining 5% or so are true unknowns. It doesn't mean they're alien. It means they're true unknowns. This question assumes we humans are privy to a highway of activity, but to call UFO sightings rare is an understatement. These events are truly once in 100 lifetimes. There is no highway of activity, but rather a low number of isolated incidents, like the Phoenix Lights, where honest analysis and intense scrutiny and skepticism will push you away from the skeptical consensus. For instance, if a father tells me he saw a mile-wide, triangular-shaped craft glide silently over his home, I urge psychiatry. When his children and wife say they saw it too, I urge family therapy. When the neighbors across the street say they saw the same thing and describe it in the same way, I begin to wonder if they're trying to trick me and this is all an elaborate joke. When more families on the other side of town, then police officers, then school teachers, then pilots, then the governor say they too also saw a mile-wide V-shaped object glide silently over their homes, it's now on me to make a decision. Are tens of thousands of people suffering from a mass delusion? Or did they see a true unknown?
I was kind of in awe, really, you know.
How big?
Bigger than anything I've ever seen in the sky.
Like an aircraft carrier in the sky?
Yeah. Something like that, yeah.
Is it really the skeptical take to dismiss all eyewitness accounts as mass delusion? When did being skeptical become synonymous with finding ordinary conclusions? Could it be possible that sometimes, paradoxically, the simplest explanation is the more perplexing one? Or I could say it like this. Could it be possible that sometimes the simplest explanation is to say, I don't know what it was?
Everyone is walking around with a 4K 60 frame per second camera on their phone. If these so-called true unknowns exist, why aren't more people uploading crystal clear close-up images of these objects?
Phone cameras, especially as it pertains to low-light capability, are terrible. For instance, this is a video I took of a plane flying over my apartment at night on an iPhone set to 4K. As you can see, it looks terrible. If I claim this was a UFO, you might scoff and say, why are all these UFO videos filmed on a potato? I mean, we're all walking around with 4K cameras on our phones. Shouldn't we be getting an image of a flying saucer in HD? It sounds like people who make this argument are ignorant of the inadequacies present in our modern phone cameras. While it's true that phone cameras work better during the day, they still attain noise the very moment they begin to zoom. And once you're fully in zoom, trying to focus on an object that is miles away, which almost all UFOs are, given that they're UFOs, unsurprisingly makes them blurry and out of focus. So in the current year, when someone sees something unusual in the sky and they try and capture it on their new iPhone, they struggle to make the image on their phones, especially at night, match what they're seeing with their eyes.
You can't see it on the camera, guys.
Goodness!
Wait, you can just.
What is it?
I don't know. I wish I could pick it up with
It's
my
coming
camera.
back round again.
But Malfi, even if I grant you that phone cameras aren't the best at capturing objects that are far away, I'm still questioning why they're always so far away. Why doesn't a flying saucer land in the middle of Yankee Stadium during the last game of the World Series? This is evidence I would need.
Arguably, even that evidence would inspire a world of conspiracies, doubts, false flag theories, and ridicule. Most would also likely see the video as so completely incredible, they would think it was CGI. Video on its own is not the best evidence. It's when the video is combined with corroborating evidence, radar data, eyewitness testimony, electro-optical data, and government or civilian documentation of the event that it becomes impossible to ignore. But I'll grant you that, hypothetically, we would have all of that if a flying saucer landed in the middle of Yankee Stadium. But that hasn't happened, has it? Look at it like this. In the case of the Phoenix Lights that I just discussed, you're still stuck having to figure out if thousands of people from Arizona suffered a collective delusion or saw a true unknown. That dichotomy doesn't suddenly disappear just because you presented me with the hypothetical scenario. Also, this question, yet again, appears to assume an alien explanation. For skeptics, it boggles my mind that you're always the ones obsessed with aliens. It's almost like I have to tell you that UFOs could be terrestrial, top-secret craft built by foreign or domestic governments. So if that were the case, landing your top-secret craft in the middle of Yankee Stadium wouldn't make any sense.
But Malfi, you often speak of the validity of the UAP videos released from the Pentagon, but Armored Skeptic made a video debunking the gimbal footage taken in 2015. Do you find his analysis accurate?
A lot of Armored Skeptic's analysis was brilliant. He even conceded this.
Even though I have never personally seen a UFO in my life, I can't escape the certainty that something is happening in our skies that defies our knowledge of the universe.
He then falls back on the UFO doesn't mean it's alien.
I really want to believe that UFOs and aliens are real, but we have no reason to believe that this is alien.
I suppose I shouldn't be so hard on some who continue to make this non-argument. In the case of Armored Skeptic, his audience would likely crucify him if he didn't say this, given how much the alien explanation has taken hold of most who are fascinated by this topic. But it's still low-hanging fruit, much like those who make anti-Jordan Peterson videos and focus solely on the cult of personality that surrounds him. That said, all in all, I think Armored Skeptic's videos on the topic were fantastic. It's his analysis of the gimbal footage, however, that we respectfully part ways.
If you track the motion, the object basically takes a straight path. The FA-18 is the one that's changing direction. But what about the fact that the object rotates? Well, the rotation that we see is likely a result of the casing around the camera rotating. The infrared camera is mounted on a double gimbal system, allowing it to rotate and point in any direction. We see similar rotating heat signatures in other military videos.
This was a claim floating around the debunking community months after this UAP release hit the internet. Others include that the video is also doing a kind of parallax effect, meaning that the clouds below, combined with the moving F-18 that's on a left turn, merely gives the illusion that this object is moving from right to left, when it's really just flying in a straight line. Armored also presented the option that it could be sitting still, then alluded that the object is just a jet. Before I take these one by one, let me start by saying that in order to grant Armored's general analysis, which is the mainstream skeptical analysis, that what this is a jet, you have to concede that in this circumstance, multiple US Navy fighter pilots could not identify an object they were currently flying in. I'll start with the weakest part first, that nothing hinges on, but still contradicts the jet hypothesis. While it's true that gimbal cameras rotate on an axis, it's also true that one of the pilots witnessing the object said, quote, "It's rotating."
There's another thing. It's rotating.
Could it be that the reason the gimbal changes its axis was in reaction to the rotation of the object? Many have also argued the object appears to make the first move. I'll let you decide for yourself on that one. But as you're about to see, absolutely nothing hinges on this. Why would the pilot say it's rotating if it wasn't? In every analysis I can find, those who claim this video is a jet always leave this and many other parts we're about to get to out. They leave out that the other pilot, who's looking at his radar, reports there's a whole fleet of them.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on my ASA.
Recognize that now you have to grant that multiple US Navy fighter pilots couldn't identify not just one jet, but a fleet of jets. Why leave this out? It seems awfully convenient. If your explanation so far, however, is to say that there were no real pilots and this is all just fake, then you're the conspiracy theorist now, not me. I'm just looking at this as well as I can. I'm not making up scenarios to try and get away from what I'm looking at and listening to. Armored then shows how similar images can be made with the gimbal camera and shows this image of a jet's exhaust plume as a general explanation for the object. While it's true this video of a jet's exhaust plume has the same color, it also shows a massive jet. Skeptics have countered this by saying the gimbal video was much further away, so any image of a jet would just disappear, but they provide no evidence for this and can point to 0 reenactments. If it's just a jet chasing a jet, there should be thousands of these reenactments, or someone should at least be able to recreate it. Now you have to grant that multiple Navy fighter pilots are tracking down a fleet of exhaust plumes. Others who claim this is a jet say it merely appears as though it's moving from right to left because of the parallax effect, but is actually just a jet moving in a straight line. This does not hold scrutiny, and I can prove it. Notice in the end of the video how the clouds on the bottom slow down as the object appears to be and is reported to be slowing down to a near halt. If the object was moving in a straight line and not right to left, why do the clouds slow down substantially as the object also slows down? And here's the proof. Recognize that the speed on the F-18 stays the same, which is right here on the bottom left, and the turn radius, which is here, remains left side up. This is proof that the plane is moving at the same speed in the same direction. This is proof that the slowing of the clouds and object is not coming from the plane slowing down to a near halt, which wouldn't make any sense. And it's not coming from the plane changing direction, but it's coming from the object slowing down. If you think I'm messing with the video, please, I've provided a link in the description so you can verify the fact for yourself. And let's get to yet another feature of this video that the skeptics ignore, which is that the object breaks lock.
It's rotating. It's rotating.
Could you imagine if this jet suddenly broke lock and shifted effortlessly to the right? How on earth can anyone with eyes ignore this in their analysis? How can they ignore the pilot saying it's rotating? How can they ignore the pilot saying there's a fleet of them? How can they ignore the slowing down of the clouds but not the jet, proving the object is slowing down without losing any of its velocity? I hope I have shown how these skeptical breakdowns are often, at the very least, incomplete.
That's what was funky. I mean, how could something move so fast like that?
Given how often those who detail personal UFO events are subject to ridicule, especially if they're credentialed airmen, some who were present during the Nimitz encounter have refused to come forward, but many have. What you're about to see has been detailed and corroborated by military personnel, sailors, Navy aviators, former commanding officer David Fravor, former senior chief petty officer Kevin Day, operations specialists Trevor, who will not disclose his last name, and former lieutenant commander Jim Clean Slate.
I was sitting back there and I noticed these tracks on the scope.
November 10th, 2004, 2 weeks before the event, the USS Princeton noticed 8 to 10 unknown objects with the advanced AN Spy 1B passive radar.
I didn't really think much about them at first. There were 8 to 10 of them at the time.
Systems specialist Trevor was the first to notify the captain of the unknowns.
It would be stationary, and then boom, it would move.
The objects showed up at 28,000 feet, moving slow.
And they started tracking south, and the strange thing about them is they were 28,000 feet going 100 knots, which is really, really strange.
They also moved erratically and randomly.
If it's aircraft, it would be moving like a solid movement across the screen, whereas here it's like jumping around.
It kind of resembled, if you can imagine, watching snowflakes fall from the sky.
To ensure the radar wasn't defective, Officer Kevin Day contacted other ships asking if they were seeing the same thing.
And sure enough, everyone else was seeing them too at that time.
The radar team and captain continued to be the only ones who knew about these objects on both the USS Princeton and the USS Nimitz, numbering just over 20 witnesses so far.
And meanwhile, my entire team on Princeton is trying to figure this thing out. And believe me, we were going through our checklist, trying to figure out what these things are, because that's our job.
As night fell, they disappeared, but showed up again the following morning. This went on sporadically. For several days, the objects disappeared and reappeared in excess of 100 times. Then, on November 14th, a scheduled routine training exercise was about to begin.
It went left, and then it banged straight up. I mean, it was insane.
This thing falls straight out of the sky in less than a second.
Former commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 41, David Fravor, and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, along with the rest of the crew, were still unaware of the objects, both of whom accompanied by a weapons systems officer sitting behind them.
We're going to climb up to 20,000 feet. We're going to go to our point about 40 miles south, and we're going to hold, wait for the other airplane.
Up until then, Petty Officer Kevin Day's experience of the unknowns had certainly been unusual. However, it was on this day he began to get worried.
Now, I wasn't really concerned about him until the morning of the 14th when we had an air defense exercise.
Officer Day pulls his captain and air defense commander aside, telling him that he doesn't think the objects are hostile, but his concern, however, is safety of flight.
Because we're getting ready to put a bunch of aircraft in the air, and I highly recommend that we go out and investigate one of these things and see what they are. He immediately concurred.
After reporting this to his captain, Princeton Radar instructed the pilots to change course and investigate the radar spot.
We took control of the flight.
They said, hey, we're going to cancel the air defense exercise.
Above them, an E-2 Hawkeye from the Wallbanger Squadron is directing the aircraft. The weather is clear, with zero cloud cover. Princeton Radar asked if they currently had ammunition.
Fast Eagle 110, say loadout.
And again, there was a stunned silence because that was a very strange question to hear.
They are now very close to the target, finding themselves in a merged plot visual arena, meaning they should no longer have to use radar to locate what they're looking for.
The contact that we're trying to see and us are inside the resolution cell of the radar, which means they can't discern the two of us.
It's at this point Fravor sees something.
And all of a sudden on the radio, we have it in overhead speaker. All of a sudden I hear, oh my God, I'm engaged, I'm engaged.
He observes a turbulent oval area of churning water with foam and frothy waves.
And I see something in the water, and it looks like about the size of a 737 in the water, pointing east.
100, anchor here, Angels 2-4. Roger. Charlie, Fast Eagle. We're observing something in the water here, possibly aircraft in the water at the merge plot, just north of our position, about 2 miles. Charlie, roger. I'm sending to Angels 14 to take a look.
This object fell straight out of the sky from 28,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean. What I found out later was 0.78 seconds.
In order for an object to do that, it would need to be traveling 48,000 miles an hour.
Oh, well above supersonic. It like a bullet out of a gun, it took off.
This thing did whatever it did without creating a sonic boom.
On the right-hand side of the airplane, just forward of the wing line, is this little white, which looks like a tic-tac, which is why we call it the tic-tac, and it's moving around erratically, so it's doing this. you know, it's not, it's moving just randomly around.
Fravor pursues the object.
It kind of recognizes that we're there and it starts to mirror us. So now think of it at the 6 o'clock position, we're at the 12 o'clock position, we're coming down and it starts coming up.
Commander Fravor is now less than a mile away. He continues.
I go, well, the only way I'm going to get this is to do an aggressive out-of-plane maneuver. He's over here, and I go like this.
He jumped 1,000 meters. I lost it.
It literally is 1 minute it's there, and the next minute it's like poof, and it's gone. We do a 180 and go back to the location we're at, and there's nothing in the water.
Strike Group Air Defense has arbitrary points in the sky called caps that are told to the crew so everyone knows where that point is.
This object suddenly disappeared off the scope.
We start going back to the cap, and the Princeton controller calls us up and he says,
of course, everyone is now listening to this intercept.
Says, hey, I'll never forget it. He goes, sir, you're not going to believe this.
Sir, you're not going to believe this.
I said, what? He says, that thing is at your cap. It's hanging out right where you're supposed to be.
The unknown is at your cap station.
Once Fravor came back, several pilots began leaving on their own to intercept the objects.
And all of a sudden, the next thing we know, we've got all these other pilots doing autonomous intercepts on their own. And as soon as the pilots went back up to their assigned altitudes, the objects popped all back into the sky to 28,000 feet and kept going 100 knots as if nothing exciting had happened.
Both Commander Fravor and Operations Specialist Trevor admit to seeing much clearer videos while on board the Princeton, uploaded to the CipherNet.
So only certain people have access to that internet. So it's a highly secure net.
Trevor was the first person to notify the captain of the objects. The officers later invited him to watch the video to see if it matched what he was observing on radar.
This object, if you're looking at the screen, it went left and then it banked straight up.
When you look at the high-res video, that good luck finding it, but the original video...
And then it just, boom, it goes up, and I remember the officer saying, there's nothing on this planet that can do that. It's not possible.
When he goes into TV mode, he's pretty zoomed in. You can see there's two little things that stick out of the bottom of it.
I don't think they'll ever release it. And I think footage that they do release and will release, they're going to make it fuzzy. They're not going to make it clear for you guys, and they're going to cut it up. You know they know what they're doing, man. Isn't it kind of obvious?
I make UFO videos to hopefully bring a fresh perspective, to expose parts of the skeptical analysis as ideological and lazy, to transcend the political, and to reinvigorate our outlook as we continue to try and understand our place in the world. I don't focus so much on UFOs because I want to believe, but because these things happen, and I think it's fascinating. So open your eyes, because one day, it might happen to you. Coming up, a closer look at the recent activity from To the Stars Academy.
It wasn't an event, it was events.
My hope is with the help of you all and everybody else, we can move this topic forward.
And their unapologetic connection to elite establishment Democrats.
We ought to be serious about investigating what's going on. Other countries have done that.
Also, recently released Navy patents that sound eerily similar to the recent sightings reported by Navy pilots.
They'd been coming down from above 80,000, come down, hang out at 20,000 for about 3 hours, and then go straight back up.
Finally, an exploration of the controversy surrounding the Sicily fires that occurred in 2004.
It should arrive.
But first, with UFO sightings down, why this continuous uptick in mainstream media coverage?
New reporting this morning on unidentified flying objects accelerating to hypersonic speed.
But you said you've been briefed on unidentified flying objects. Are they real?
Personally, I tend to doubt it.
Do I believe it? Not particularly. But we'll watch it. You'll be the first to know.
It's one of those rare moments where if everything the mainstream media was telling us was exactly as it seemed, it would still be pretty incredible.
Either another country has leapfrogged the United States in technology or extraterrestrial.
Those are the leading hypotheses, yes.
Some United States senators have received an actual briefing on this UFO phenomenon.
How concerned should we be about the briefing that you received on UFOs?
Some of the press reports are accurate. I think people are taking this issue much more seriously, which I think in previous generations may not have been the case.
And of course, there are so many who think they've now become vindicated.
There are people who are truly just out of their heart searching for the truth.
Who think that what we're seeing here is not coincidence or happenstance, but an intentional disclosure. That this process is happening on purpose and by design, and that everything that's been said for the past 70 years is not purely psychological.
The UFO phenomenon is the partial penetration of our own cultural space by others.
Now, I saw that. I don't give a goddamn what anybody else says about it. I saw that.
Or that is all just wishful thinking, and we're lying to ourselves. We're being lied to. The membership of To the Stars Academy, the putative UFO disclosure team, has grown. Along with the initial group of government insiders and Tom DeLonge, they now include Dr. Colm Kelleher, a molecular biologist who wrote the rather eccentric book Hunt for the Skinwalker.
Something forced 4 2,000-pound bulls to cram themselves into this trailer without opening this door. It's completely impossible.
Although Dr. Kelleher is obviously very intelligent and credentialed, and he's always appeared sincere, I'm cautious of his involvement, as he's often eager to apply a, quote, paranormal explanation to UFOs. Separating UFOs from its stigma requires that it remain separated from the paranormal, because once that spooky door opens, fictitious notions of Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster follow. This is a problem. Science and, quote, paranormal activity are diametric and can't coexist in one's inquiry regarding UFOs, which by all accounts appears to be entirely physical. This doesn't mean that consciousness or psychology aren't playing a role, but that the means for testing these factors must come from the mechanistic framework of science, not from a metaphysic or an appeal to the paranormal, at least for now. Another addition is Dr. Paul Rapp, listed here as a brain function and consciousness consultant, and Dr. Norm Kahn, who's spent more than 30 years in the CIA working in counter-biological weapons programs. And the range of opinions about the intentions of this group are endless. Some think they are truly altruistic. Others think they're trying to deceive the public or even foreign governments about top-secret technology they might be privy to. But there's one thing that no one can doubt, and that's how powerful their influence has been in American media in the past 2 years. Make no mistake, the primary, if not the only reason we're seeing all this UFO stuff in the news is because of TTSA. More specifically, because of Chris Mellon, Luis Elizondo, and Jim Simivan, two of whom were spies for the CIA, and all of whom still consult with intelligence agencies and are still under NDAs. So because of their high status and high connections, they're able to get outlets like the New York Times or the Washington Post to print seemingly sincere stories about UFOs with confidence, which gives the topic a newly perceived sense of credibility to the public, making it easier for mainstream journalists to finally pop the question to the president.
Do you think you'd know if there were evidence of extraterrestrial?
Well, I think our great pilots would know. And some of them really see things that are a little bit different than in the past. So we're going to see.
This is all because of these three men who have single-handedly influenced, for better or worse, a nation's perspective on UFOs or UAPs. And influencing nations is what these men do best, because they've been influencing the affairs of foreign nations for decades.
I'm the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Clinton and Bush administrations and the former Minority Staff Director of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So that was part of my function on the Secretary of Defense's staff to review sensitive reconnaissance activities, programs that, if exposed, could cause embarrassment to the United States. Embarrassment to the United States. Embarrassment to the United States. Some of the most sensitive activities involve covert action programs where we're seeking to covertly influence events abroad, influence events abroad, influence events abroad, influence events abroad, influence events abroad.
There's a new name. It's unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Do you think you'd know if there were evidence of extraterrestrial?
We're joined now by Chris Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense.
Some information about what was going on at Area 51.
Senate Intelligence Committee conducts oversight of all U.S. foreign intelligence agencies and programs. My name is Christopher Mellon. I'm the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense.
Chris Mellon is part of one of the richest, most influential banking families in the U.S. He's connected to nearly every avenue of power in America. This makes it difficult to trust him and by proxy to the Stars Academy. However, some within TTSA do relieve some of those misgivings. Hal Puthoff.
So-called empty space isn't really empty at all. It's actually full of energy.
Although he too spends time researching the paranormal, his raw science is fascinating. In '98, he created a patent that was rejected for 5 years as pseudoscience. But upon closer inspection, patent agents realized the invention was operable. In other words, Puthoff's patent was using physics that were so advanced and albeit obscure, it took patent agents over 5 years to understand it. So if his involvement is sincere, which I think it is, then maybe Chris Mellon and Luis Elizondo's involvement is also sincere. No one can be certain, not even Hal Puthoff, and the possibility they're all imparting some kind of psychological operation is conceivable. But I guess no matter how closely one looks at it, currently, their intentions remain mysterious.
But what if for a moment we know what they are doing, they know we know what they are doing, but the American people have no idea. 'Cause, 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 'cause,
Blumenthal was not talking about aliens, but either Russia or China, both of whom are developing war-fighting capabilities for space, hence the current administration's insistence on a space force. But is it possible that there are even bigger things to worry about regarding our adversaries?
I think it's probably some sort of Russian or Chinese DARPA-like aircraft.
My greatest fear is that an adversary did figure it out, and we are just way.
In a patent recently granted to the US Navy, one engineer proposed building a craft using an inertial mass reduction device.
When I say it was following us, I don't mean individual aircraft. I mean, wherever we were, they were there.
Claiming the craft would use a kind of quantum bubble and allow the ship to travel in water, air, and space.
They were literally breaking the laws of physics in my eyes.
Many are saying this patent could potentially explain the recent Tic Tac sightings from Navy personnel, but this notion is misguided and largely overblown. One reason is it assumes this patent is the first of its kind, but these are anything but new, with almost 80 claiming to have cracked the code of, quote, flying saucers. Jack Frost claimed his patent, called Avrocar, a real flying saucer, could move from supersonic speeds to completely still, vertically climb to 100,000 feet, and make rapid turns. The Air Force invested $10 million in the craft, and this is during the 50s. Today, that would be roughly $100 million. It was top priority, it was top secret, but was recently declassified, letting us see for the very first time the beautiful, majestic power of Jack Frost's real flying saucer. The craft never made it more than 3 feet off the ground and was discontinued. So as it pertains to all the flying saucer, triangular spaceship, and wormhole patents, we don't appear to have gotten very far, which is unsurprising. Just because there's a patent doesn't mean that we have it. The truth is, these are likely attempts to back-engineer a technology we don't really understand and have yet to fully replicate, unless you think we have replicated it, but it's tucked away in a black project somewhere. But if that's the case, the patent would be top secret. If the US did have this craft that could go near the speed of light, as this new patent claims, which is nearly 60 million miles per hour, which can go around the Earth 7.5 times in a second, you expect me to believe that the government would have this paradigm-changing technology, a technology that would essentially make them a god, available on Google? I doubt that. So I simply don't buy the idea that this one patent represents where the Navy currently is technologically. I don't think so. What's far more feasible is that we don't know what these things are, and we don't know how to build them. Yet many disagree with me here and cling to what they think is the more conventional explanation to UFOs, which is that they're just likely top secret man-made technology. But if you think this, and also think that most of these pilots are likely seeing what they say they're seeing, even if it's just sometimes, that means that you think that somehow humans have created aerial vehicles that appear to trained observers to, quote, defy physics.
Not the world's greatest drawer, but as you can see here, it almost looks like a gyroscope, right? The way it moves, the points coming out of the top and the bottom of what appears to be a disc, or at least a central mass on the object.
Well, when exactly did we figure out how to do that?
The jets were like trying to trail this thing, and it would just run off and leave them. It would just gone.
And these objects were consistently reported to take off into outer space.
And then went up at that acute 90-degree angle, and then it shot off and went straight into space, or in the air, or wherever it came from.
And all the while, this man-made, physics-shattering, solar system-traveling spacecraft, watercraft, aircraft, craft has remained completely secret. Well, with the exception of these videos, but, you know, the builders and funders and engineers and physicists and mathematicians and generals and aerospace engineers and all of the others who would have had to participate in the creation of this craft have still managed to keep this secret.
A lot of people want to believe that this is a foreign adversary of terrestrial origin that we are probably already aware of. I find that highly unlikely.
I'm not saying black projects don't exist. Back engineering, exotic metamaterials are all presumably stuck deep inside of compartmented programs. We also know that foreign adversaries are currently exceeding the US in hypersonic maneuverable missiles, clocked up to 6,000 miles per hour.
Мы назвали его Сармат.
But look at that massive plume of smoke. This is the most advanced stuff we seem to have, and we know exactly what we're looking at here because these missiles follow all the laws of physics, as they should. These speeds will eventually have commercial applications.
Hypersonic technology is a really important investment area for the future. In the next decade or two, you're going to see that become a reality.
But no one here is even close to talking about an object that far exceeds supersonic.
Oh, well above supersonic. It like a bullet out of a gun, it took off.
And no one is talking about an object that has no exhaust plume, or that can suddenly stop, or hover motionless in the clouds for days, then bolt down to the sea.
This object drops out from the sky. If you see a shooting star, it'll break up, but this thing just kept coming down and it stopped. At that moment, the object goes from right to left in a split second. It went so fast that we actually had to turn our bodies to fear.
I also point this out because those who think these objects can be explained by man-made top-secret conspiracies actually think they're using Occam's razor.
I think it's probably some sort of Russian or Chinese DARPA-like aircraft. Maybe even our own DARPA. Maybe even our own DARPA that the Pentagon doesn't even know about.
Admittedly, Occam's razor is a somewhat overrated subjective mental model that can be wrongly used as a replacement for logic and insight, but nonetheless, it's valuable. So judge for yourself. What's more likely, the man-made conspiracy theory that requires a labyrinth of assumptions, or that we just don't know what these things are? Patents get pushed through often that might work in theory, but in practice are currently improbable. It's likely this is the stage this patent is in, but don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing ambition. We should definitely be investing in this area, given that China and Russia already are.
I guarantee you that he's got a lot of information on this.
I'm saying that it's far more probable that the Tic Tacs are not attributable to man, in the same way that flying saucers are not attributable to man, both of which are reported to maneuver in similar ways, and both of which seem to be linked in some way. This, however, has gone unreported in the media.
And I see something in the water. If you've ever been out to sea with like an underwater seamount, as the waves come and there's something right under the surface, they'll break.
A rare theory is that the craft David Fravor saw just under the surface of the water was a flying saucer. For a point of reference, here's Naval Operations Specialist Trevor, who was on board the Nimitz during the Tic Tac incidents in 2004.
The object that I saw was a flying saucer shape, not a Tic Tac. This object had shot from the ocean up. That object made a couple different quick maneuvers, but everybody says Tic Tac, I don't remember that at all. Straight dome, but like a flat bottom. It looked just like a flying saucer, just like we all know, we've all seen reports of, just a dome with a flat bottom, just like that. And I've tried verifying this with other people, and they just do not want to talk about it. I'll never forget that day, the rest of my life. It blew my mind.
I find it telling that no one in the media or no one in To the Stars Academy even mentions this report. I understand the DoD wants to move away from the stigma, but I worry that while attempting to do this, they leave out pertinent information that can help the public link these recent events.
It looked just like a flying saucer
with past events.
So it looked like a round disc,
helping us to substantiate the phenomenon as a reoccurring presence with noticeable patterns.
And then you saw it, and then boom, it was gone.
And over to the entrance of Pearl Harbor, there was 9 silver discs.
A dome with a flat bottom.
It was shaped like 2 saucers put together with a golf ball on top. Tell me who did that. Tell me in 1964, who had that technology?
But if you think that flying saucers, or UFOs generally, are purely a cultural invention, why then have governments around the world been continually trying to create them? Is all of this a coincidence or incompetence? I don't think so. I think it's simple. Flying saucers and other aerial phenomena are real and physical, and for decades, aerospace projects have been continually trying to recreate them, the success of which remains to be seen. To report one.
The most serious occurrence happened in this room while we were eating. Electrical fuse box here, the whole thing burned.
Journalist Ariel Ramchandani investigated the event, concluding that Giuseppe was indeed responsible. She does state, however, that this is not the consensus of those in the town, who continue to claim the fires erupted spontaneously. I myself, along with law enforcement and national journalists, have seen objects burst into flames out of nowhere. Former mayor of Caneto di Caronia.
I witnessed a fireman throw an electrical motor out of the window of a house. It was incredibly hot, almost melted. I want to add that all the electrical connections in that area had been cut off by then.
But this could be attributed to Giuseppe's arson, given he was still in the town when this was seen. Among the items that were charred included televisions, radios, cell phones, even a person's bed.
Mattresses would catch fire spontaneously while people were sleeping on them. I was scared and went to stay with my mother.
Could Giuseppe have set a mattress on fire while someone was sleeping on it without being noticed? It sounds difficult, but considering the architecture in the village, being able to maneuver in and out of open doors and windows does look achievable. The Civil Protection Unit eventually quarantined the entire area, and wouldn't you know, the fires stopped. It would be dishonest of me, however, if I didn't include the claims made by the scientific investigation, which states that after the evacuation, anomalies continued.
USB drives and computers were malfunctioning. Cars were locking and unlocking on their own.
This is Francesco Venerando, who led the Civil Protection Unit's investigation. While the village was evacuated, his team, which included a scientist from NASA, began monitoring magnetic forces, and to their surprise, documented hundreds of massive fraction-of-a-second bursts of electromagnetic energy.
The phenomena were many and happened repeatedly over time. It wasn't just one episode.
Tracking the pulses up to 15 gigawatts, which is more power than the space shuttle generates on liftoff.
We concluded that these phenomena weren't caused by natural events.
These findings are similar to another scientific report by the Italian Air Force, but written 70 years prior, which identifies the town of Caronia as an area with, quote, electromagnetic phenomena. After months of research, the team in Caronia converged on a controversial hypothesis.
From everything we monitored, we think it plausible that the electromagnetic forces came from the sea.
And these are only the leaked results. The entire official report was made secret by the Italian government.
We think the most likely reason that the report was never made public was that it might have contained something that couldn't be divulged.
Francesco was asked if he thought Giuseppe's arson explained everything. He gave 3 reasons why it didn't. Number 1, the anomalies were not limited to the inside of homes, but affected the functioning of electrical equipment, but most notably, their compasses.
Compasses wouldn't work anymore. Not only when they were near magnetic forces or metal objects, but wherever you put them.
Number 2, the plant species Ampelodesmos, the roots of which internally combusted, while incredibly, at the same time, no other surrounding tree or shrubbery was disturbed. To think this is the work of man would have involved the deployment of means, men, time, and money beyond rationality. And number 3, the spate of UFO sightings reported in Caronia. August 2nd, 2004, Italian military personnel reported 2 disc-like objects hovering over the sea. Taking this image, an analysis of which I will leave up to you. But he also gave a 4th and relatively controversial reason, which, for better or worse, brings us all the way back to the Stars Academy.
We had been hearing for a while rumors that there was a potential attack on an Italian aircraft.
Elizondo met with a group of Italian investigators, some of whom retired military, that study UFOs.
On 2004 in Sicily, a craft appeared a few hundred of meters behind the capture tail, and it shot a ray that destroyed helicopter wings.
The History Channel claimed the helicopter belonged to the Italian military, but this is false. It belonged to Francesco's Civil Protection Unit. The reason, Francesco states, the helicopter was forced to land, and no one was harmed, by the way, was attributed to electromagnetism. No biological residue was found on the damaged blades, and the electrical conductivity inside the copter was so badly damaged, it had to be entirely replaced by the manufacturer. Antonio Spinato, a local who claimed to have witnessed the event.
I noticed the helicopter was flying in a funny way, as if it was going to crash. So I grabbed my camera and took some photos.
This is an insignificant photograph, but Antonio's testimony, valuable or not, does mirror claims made by locals and officials alike.
At night, you can easily spot lights coming from the sky or the sea.
Francesco states that arson cannot account for any one of these.
This object had shot from the ocean up.
They were reported to have gone into the water.
That day changed my whole perspective on life. Gave me some relief.
One possible view of the flying saucer is that it is a kind of projection from the consciousness of the planet, that it is in fact a kind of alchemical object haunting human historical time with a symbol of totality, the kind of totality that our religions and our mystical yearnings are so at pains to concretize for us. Saying that the flying saucer is a psychic object does not mean that it is not a physical object. But unless we, as egocentric beings, clarify our relationship to the unconscious, then I think the flying saucer is going to remain quintessentially mysterious.
Investigators found multiple aircraft encounters they could not explain, and they've even been storing metal alloy recovered from the vicinity of these encounters.
So being a little bit of a rebel, as I was at school, I was one of the first to run through and jump over the fence and arrive at the Grange, and it was on the ground in front of me. The other 2 girls had arrived before me, and one was hysterical, Tanya, and the other girl had fainted. So I just looked at it, and after a few minutes it just raised up above me, probably to about 12 feet, turned on its side and went straight up into the air and disappeared almost instantly.
Of course, UFO does not mean alien, and this distinction matters, because many people do misunderstand the term.
More than 80 million Americans believe in aliens.
No, more than 80 million Americans see that there are objects maneuvering in our skies that are unidentified. although many do associate that with, quote, aliens, but also the likelihood of another life somewhere in the universe, or, quote, aliens, does not necessarily require belief. It's statistically improbable that we're the only species in the universe that can think about the fact that we're thinking. That said, there are some who use this distinction as a tool to dismiss the topic entirely.
Well, so people, I think, have conflated the concept of a UFO with whether we're visited by aliens. UFO means unidentified, flying object, okay? This is a highly non-specific term.
But you know what we're looking at. You stare at the cosmos for a living.
I'm not authorized to go beyond this part.
Wow, you're in!
Although it's true that many who operate this stuff too eagerly do assume non-terrestrial explanations. Others are just curious because of the evidence at hand and our inability to explain it. And the story you're about to hear falls precisely into that category, which is a true story of mystery and derangement. You will hear it all from their perspective. You will hear their testimonies from their own mouths, where it all started at 11 a.m. on April the 6th, 1966.
And I just happened to be looking out the window, thinking how to fudge my science report. What I saw directly south was something that I'd never seen before.
The kids were just wrapping up their sports on the cricket oval at Westall High in Melbourne, Australia. Among them was 13-year-old Jackie Argent and her friend Tanya, when suddenly an object about the size of 2 or 3 cars was seen hovering over the school by more than 200 observers, most of whom children between the ages of 12 and 13, but also observed by a handful of teachers.
So it was a round silver disc, and it seemed to be very low over the school, and I remember kids screaming and running inside.
We watched the way it moved, which was amazing. It was capable of standing still and moving very, very fast.
The student came in, was hysterical, leaned up against a sliding door, screaming, "There's a flying saucer in the oval." And of course everybody started to head towards the door, and the teacher said, "Sit down, it's not recess yet," and a few minutes later the bell went off.
Everyone started moving, like a whole lot of zebras being terrified by crocodiles.
Though the children were panicked, most were also curious, with the majority of them running toward the craft together. Barbara Robbins, who was the chemistry teacher at the time, grabbed her camera and started taking pictures. The craft descends into the forest known as the Grange. Jackie and her friend Tanya watch. They decide to pursue the craft and leave the school grounds by hopping the fence. Tanya goes first.
Tanya and I and this other girl, we were over the fence. Tanya was in the lead and we ran towards where it was coming down. I lost sight of Tanya. She was in front of me.
Tanya, now split from her friend Jackie and alone, finds the object on the ground. It was motionless, leaving an imprint on the grass where it rested. And other than the student Victor Zakruzny and a few watching him behind the fence, Tanya was the only child to be this close to the object. Multiple planes are flying above. The craft rises, taking off in a maneuver that has been described the same way by all observers.
We looked up and we just saw this saucer type thing taking off, and it seemed to turn side on and just disappear into thin air.
I see Andrew Greenwood, the science teacher, coming towards me, and he said, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" And he pointed up in the air, and I said, "No, see what?" I have a very, very clear picture of him, and I remember almost exactly what he said. And he said it was up in the sky, it moved in incredible speeds, it hovered, it seemed to go away, and there seemed to be light planes. He thought they were actually checking it out from the Melbourne airport, and they were circling around it.
Sort of stopped dead, and then it just sort of started descending straight down. And I'd say it got down about halfway up that gum tree or above the goalpost and sat there for a while, and then it just sort of lifted straight up and then just took straight off.
This thing went down behind the trees, then it came up. It was like it had become aware of these planes coming in, and it just went woof and just left them like they were standing still. Like a lot of other people, I just shut up about it. You know, you were a kid, you were making it up. So you just be quiet, and in your mind, you just think, I know what I saw, and no one's ever going to shake me from that. I know what I saw.
Can I ask what happened to the girl? You took her back to the school, the one that was hysterical. Is it Tanya?
Tanya comes out of the woods screaming to Jackie for help. They're split up, with Jackie being put back inside the school and Tanya in an ambulance.
There was an ambulance on the oval, and she'd been taken away in the ambulance.
Jackie went to Tanya's house to check on her, surprised, however, to see that the woman who answered the door had an English accent and was not Tanya's mom.
I went to her house the following day, and an English-speaking woman opened the door and said there had never been a Tanya living there. Now, the problem with that is that Tanya's parents didn't speak English to start with. They were Yugoslavian. So I'd been to this house a lot of times and then was told, no, sorry, you're mistaken. Tanya actually reached the craft. I didn't. She came back screaming towards me, and then I ran back with her to the school. She got taken away in an ambulance, and that was the last time I saw her.
Do you know if she disappeared? Have you had any contact with her? Do you know where she is and what happened?
I have had no personal contact with her. I know one of the researchers has. She told the researcher that she had no recall of what had happened, that she had no recall of what had happened, she had no recall of what had happened, she had no recall of what had happened, she had no recall.
She was just gone and she never came back to school.
Shortly after the event, the police and military officials arrived, some speaking with American accents. A class assembly was held, where the principal was telling the children that nothing had happened and not to talk about it.
I was prepped to tell the students that what they'd seen didn't exist.
I was near the gate and the police had arrived.
There were journalists outside. The police are being called in to keep the journalists away.
We were told that we weren't allowed to speak to the media.
A confrontation occurred between Barbara Robbins, who was the chemistry teacher who took the pictures, the principal, and a military official, who instructed her to give up not just the film, but the entire camera. After the kids were permitted to leave, some did interviews with the media, until they were told not to.
And I'd actually been giving an interview to Channel 9, and the policeman actually walked up to them and said, stop filming and you go back into the school ground. Okay, so that's what I did. I was 12 and a half years old.
Because I was a mischievous sort of person, I was always getting into trouble. I had detention for actually appearing on the show, and then I got detention again at a later date after my picture and story was in the Dandenong Journal.
Although the interviews were aired on Channel 9, no one has ever been able to attain the recorded footage because Channel 9 no longer has it and cannot account for why the film reel has gone missing. But the children and teachers were not the only people who witnessed the event. Those whose homes surrounded the Grange also saw the object, including Paul Smith, who, along with the craft, noticed something else even the school hadn't seen.
I just thought, oh, somebody's got some way of projecting a film of something into the sky. I didn't believe that it was really happening. After a while, trucks turned up with, it looked like army trucks. There would have been about 20 guys got out.
Another witness of these army trucks was Les Madu, an apprentice mechanic. Him and his co-worker crouched behind some trees to get a better look, having to duck out of sight of the farmer, who Les claims was lapping the farm to keep watch.
We can only look every so often as this tractor came around. He was on guard duty. This was a farmer who's decided to help out.
2 army trucks, 2 men in camouflage, and 2 in blue uniforms were in the farm. One was wielding what looked like a metal detector, sweeping the small same area of the farm. In the next moment, they turned and started kicking the grass over and over.
They started kicking violently at the ground. The 2 officers decide then, time to come back.
Paul waits, then walks up to the spot the men were at and sees the same imprint Terry Peck was describing.
And it did land because when we got there was a great big round patch of like flattened sort of yellow, and the grass was all flattened in a swirly sort of a pattern.
And the same one that's in this photograph, which was not taken at Westall High, but 4 months earlier by farmer George Pedley in Tully, Australia. According to declassified files from the National Archives of Australia, the farmer listed the same characteristics as the objects seen at Westall High. The most interesting characteristic was, quote, "After ascending, the object proceeded to tilt to its side, then accelerate at a fantastic speed southwest."
Turned on its side.
And it just went woof and just left them like they were standing still.
The object was described as making no loud noises other than a faint buzzing Pedley mistook for his tractor.
And it was making a low buzzing sound.
And 4 days earlier, this photograph was taken at the Grange at Westall High.
Turned on its side and went zoom straight up into the air and disappeared almost instantly. And went zoom straight up the air and disappeared almost instantly.
Many other sightings occurred around the same time. Just 2 days before Westall, Ron Sullivan was driving his car when he noticed an incredibly bright light in the forest to his right. The object was pulling Ron's car toward itself. Ron claimed his lights were bending and becoming stretched as if they were magnetized.
The top and the headlights of the car was the biggest awesome thing I've ever seen. They just pulled to the right, as if they were magnetised. I could see all the trees on the right-hand side of the road lighting up, and I said, get out of this one, and I pulled on the left. I could feel the back left wheel spinning, and I got out of that.
2 days before that, a young man crashed his car in the same place, running into the same tree.
A couple of people from the government departments came and visited me. I know one was from the Air Force. They looked at the car, just walked around. I said, well, let's know what you find out. They said, yeah, we will, Mr. Sullivan. Never heard any more about it.
Kevin Hurley, another man who saw the imprints the day of the event, went to the Grange to check again, only to find the military there, not allowing anyone inside.
There was the Air Force of the Army, a whole group of them there, stopping us from going through into the paddock. Don't come near this in this area. And we just headed off back home. And they had some sort of instrument, which at the time I thought looked like Geiger counters. The strong memory I've got is what happened after that. And about a week later, I decided to go back again to have another look. As soon as we got down to where the paddock started, all the grass had been cut, which was quite disturbing. Wow. So then we walked through that area to where the circles were, and when we got into the area where the circles were previously, the whole area had been burnt.
And how soon after you saw the flying saucers did the Army and or possibly Air Force personnel show up? How quickly did they get there?
I reckon probably 25, 30 minutes.
I think it was only 20 minutes, which is not a long time.
To have responded, that's one of the... That really, to my way of thinking, that's the key. It's the fact that we respond, whoever it was, the authorities, responded so rapidly.
How did the military respond so fast? And why were many of them wearing camos, clothing the Australian military was not wearing in the mid-60s?
Australians were not using camouflage uniforms in those days, in the mid-60s. Nor would they have been British. But the description of the uniforms certainly matches those worn by the United States Air Force in the mid-1960s.
There were American troops stationed in Australia in 1966 as part of the Vietnam War effort and the current boom of the Cold War, leading some to claim that the American military might have been stationing an advanced technology and that the multiple sightings of crafts in the sky are our own inventions. Even many of the witnesses conceded this, Jackie Argent being one of them.
Initially, I would have said it was some sort of test aircraft. I fell in line with that theory. But there's never been an aircraft, to my knowledge, today that can do what that did.
Unacknowledged special access programs possibly could be hiding something like this. Combine that with the response time of the military directly after this event, and you have yourself a convincing explanation. But that explanation could open the door to another question, which is, where did they get it from? Could humans build something that moves in ways we cannot understand? Or is it more likely that if this tech does exist, it's been attained and not built. But that's as far as I'll go with that. I certainly cannot claim to know the answer. Some skeptics, however, think they know exactly what the object was at Westall High.
Researcher Keith Basterfield believes a rogue balloon is the explanation for the Westall UFO.
I'll let you make up your mind on that. And this is what's so fascinating about the Westall incident, which is that other than a few diehards, most skeptics actually concede that they do not know what it was. Even Skeptoid.com, who releases all their attempts to debunk every UFO ever recorded, admits that this case is a difficult one to solve after they scrambled around aimlessly in the article, forcing their theories by arrogantly patronizing and dismissing all eyewitness accounts. They were still forced to admit that, quote, the Westall 66 UFO remains one of the many question marks in the books, end quote. They then fell on the distinction that, quote, I don't know does not mean it was extraterrestrial. Well, then we agree, because I can honestly say that I do not know either, and I prefer it that way, because not knowing is the point. It doesn't mean I never want to find out the truth of these incidents. It simply means that I do not have an answer, and that I'm open to entertaining certain possibilities that will best and most accurately match the claims made by the witnesses, who I believe, and that some of those possibilities could be extraordinary.
It was amazing, and something that, I've never forgotten. But you just sort of had it stored in the back of your mind because a lot of people are sceptical.
The fact that they can travel so fast and that they've been spotted all over the world.
It still would take me to my grave. What the hell was that?
She told the researcher that she had no recall of what had happened, and then there was a very odd story about her parents putting her in a convent for some reason that was, to me, totally ridiculous.
I sometimes get asked how could I possibly, quote, believe in UFOs. But rather than just believing, which implies an absence of objectivity and not a process of discovery, it's a fact that sometimes we cannot readily identify what we see in the sky. Still, there are many who continue to think this topic is absurd, claiming that by acknowledging the data at all, that one is also claiming UFOs are, quote, aliens.
So there are a myriad of UFO nuts out there who are going to tell me that I'm closed-minded for not believing the rather outrageous claim that Earth is being visited by aliens.
I'm not saying they're aliens. I'm just interested in looking at the data, which is precisely what we'll be doing here. What you're about to see is the most famous UFO event in the world, and one that I think is significant, but some skeptics disagree. Let's see what you think.
Turned a lot of heads, made worldwide news, and then it was denied.
It is the most famous UFO sighting in the world.
What many aren't aware of is that 2 years before the Phoenix Lights, Dr. Lynn Kitai noticed something unusual outside her window.
In 1995, both my husband and I witnessed 3 amber orbs in a triangle formation, one on top and 2 closely aligned underneath, very close to our home, about 100 yards from our home. It was startling, and it was amazing at the same time.
2 years passed, with Dr. Lynn noticing nothing in the sky coming close to resembling what she previously saw, until a month and a half before the Phoenix Lights event, and she saw them again and recorded it.
January 22nd, 1997, I noticed 3 amber orbs now at a distance far west on the horizon. And I get an operator on the phone and I said, quick, you gotta get somebody out there. There's some strange lights in front of South Mountain. As I finish my sentence, they're gone.
Dr. Lynn then picks up her phone to call the Arizona Republic to get information on the lights.
The operator got off, she got right back on. She said, nope, nobody called. Well, I know I called.
The next morning she calls the Arizona Republic again, but instead of asking them about the origin of the, quote, orbs, she asks if they received any calls last night in regards to the lights. The operator pled ignorance and directed Lynn's inquiry to Luke Air Force Base, but after briefly speaking with a critical lieutenant who claimed they had nothing to do with it, they directed her to the airport, who said the following.
He said, actually, there were 3 at 8 o'clock. They looked on radar. They didn't show up on radar. The 3 disappeared. After he picked up binoculars to look, it was that unusual. They were 6 points of light that seemed to be attached to something, but they couldn't see what it was attached to. Slowly moving in synchrony, as he put it. So I said, well, where were they? And there was silence. And finally he says, beats me.
Reported at 6:55 p.m., a man in Henderson, Nevada witnessed an object in the shape of a V with 6 large lights pass over him from the northwest. 8:15 p.m., former police officer Tom Chavez witnessed a cluster of 5 orange lights, consisting of 4 lights together with a 5th light seemingly trailing the other 4.
They didn't glare. They did not emit like a beam, like a floodlight, like landing light craft lamp. There seemed to be some depth to them.
Calls began to flood police stations and media offices across multiple districts, including Chino Valley, Prescott Valley, Dewey, Cords Junction, Wickenburg, Cave Creek, and many other communities to the north and west of Phoenix. Then, this happened.
Wait, where? There's another one too. Where? Oh, look at that. There's another one. No, we're just excited. We're not. They keep coming. Wait, look at them. I got that.
But what some misunderstand is this video shows the second event. The majority of sightings actually occurred before this in the state of Nevada and Arizona. The Public Affairs Office at Luke Air Force Base announced that their personnel had investigated these lights, establishing they were flares launched from an A-10 Warthog. But miles of controversy exist over this claim, so much so that 3 years after the sighting, the Arizona National Guard staged a demonstration to quell the claims made from those who kept saying what they saw was not flares. Judge for yourself in this side-by-side comparison. But ultimately, whether we're looking at flares or not, holds no bearing on the thousands of sightings that happened previously, reporting a V-shaped craft moving slowly and quietly through the entire state of Arizona. This leads many to claim 3 possibilities in regards to these lights. 1 being that they are not flares. 2 being if they are flares, it's simply a random coincidence of timing. Or 3, someone was likely instructed to do it on purpose in order to provide an explanation for this.
We were telling ourselves not to blink.
It was very close to the ground. It was just like floating over the housetops.
The first thing that struck me is that they were just in a V-shaped formation. Well, it's at night, and guys wouldn't have been flying in a V-shaped formation, in a VIC, we'd call it a VIC. So now I'm looking at 5 lights passing overhead silently at a very slow rate. And it also occurred to me that they were flying too slow to stay in the air if it was an aircraft.
It must have been around 10-ish, and I'm looking off towards the north. Coming in directly at me are these 3 enormous lights, and they're moving incredibly slow.
When somebody in our group said, "Oh my gosh, what is that up above?" we all looked up at the same time and saw this amazing, huge, dark, silent object.
My emotion was that of just kind of wonderment and trying to figure out, what am I looking at? What am I seeing here?
Purportedly, the craft moved south across the entire state of Arizona. Witnesses claim whatever it was totally quiet.
There was absolutely no sound at all.
Just 3 beautiful lights coming towards us. And it seemed to move effortlessly, just glided right over.
This was one solid object, one craft, one big, large boomerang.
Everybody that called me said the same thing. It was huge, it was slow, it was low, it was totally silent. They could see some lights, somewhere between 5 and 9 lights on it at any given time.
Claiming the lights had abnormal characteristics.
It was an orangish amber light, and it was so rich and lustrous, it's almost as if the objects seemed to be comprised of the light itself.
They were more like glowing, gaseous globes.
There's no flaring. They're like a ball. On the video, they flicker, they're white, they're much smaller. But nonetheless, the formations themselves are compelling.
When it got directly over my head, and I mean, I'm talking dead center here, I was right underneath this thing. It was like there was no filament in this thing. They appear to be in a canister. There was light swimming around in this shape or form.
And they weren't beaming down like landing lights. They were just big balls of light, but very pretty.
And the craft was said to be massive, with some gauging it to be more than a mile wide.
We could not see the whole object from front to back, from side to side. It was so big.
I would gauge this object to be several football fields. I mean, like a mile, maybe more than a mile, maybe even 2 miles. It was huge.
I put my hand up to where the nose of the craft was, and I took my other arm out to where the end of the wing was, and it was well over 30 inches. And I said to my wife at the time, I said, that's a mile long.
It was coming over the mountain, and it was like almost as wide as one of the humps. And it was very low.
It's coming across the sky, and as it's moving, it's blocking and unblocking the stars. There is actually a shape.
The object we saw, if we opened up a newspaper, you could not block out the object that we saw.
It's one of the biggest things I've ever seen that moved like that. I mean, it was just enormous.
There was like a light grid. It was almost dancing to a beat. Dim light, almost shadow behind. I wouldn't say that it was intense, but it was definitely profound.
When you look down the street on a hot day in Phoenix, above the street's like, it's really wavy, and you see everything kind of distorted, and that's what it looked like up inside the middle of the craft.
It was just gliding, and then it stopped, and then it like the sides retracted a little, and then it was gone.
Just went.
Acceleration to deceleration, it was no noise the whole time.
And not a sound.
So how about we work together and try to figure out what this thing is?
Even after thousands of calls to city officials from citizens requesting answers of just what happened, no explanation came. Then after a few months, the governor at the time, Fife Symington, finally, on June 19th, made a statement.
And now I'll ask Officer Stein and his colleagues to escort the accused into the room so that we may all look upon the guilty party. Don't get him too close to me, please. This just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
But eventually, he explained why he felt the need to make light of March 13th.
People coming into my office saying this thing is just reaching heights of hysteria and concern. And so 3 of us sort of sat down at the end and decided to try to lighten the mood a little bit.
He then, after being retired for some time, opened up about his experience witnessing the first event.
I told Ann what I was doing. I was going to go up to Squaw Peak and see what everybody was, clamoring about. If you had been here 10 years ago and standing out here and looking up there at the lights and the view, you would have been astounded. You would have been amazed. But that was total bunk. Those I've seen high altitude flares before. I mean, that wasn't, they weren't flares. And when I walked in the front door, she looked at me, and I was apparently just, normally I'm fair complected and pale anyway, right? And she said, oh my gosh, she said she looked like a ghost. I still, behind the scenes, tried to investigate it, but I got nowhere. There were the sightings of the America West plane coming into Sky Harbor, said he could have landed on it.
It was enormous, like an aircraft carrier in the sky. Is that about as close as it gets?
I think that's a fair description.
Oh my God.
Yeah. In your gut, you could just tell that it was otherworldly. What did you see? And I said, well, I don't know what I saw, but it was really something, and I'm not going to talk about it.
Once I realized how large it was, it just faded off into the night just quite quickly. I wanted it to last longer. I wanted to see more of it. It just went away.
According to director of Skeptoid.com Brian Dunning, all eyewitness accounts should be approached with a shrug, claiming that the Phoenix lights were flares. Deal with it. Dunning continues, saying the Phoenix lights fall well within the wide range of brightness that's possible from LUU-2 illumination flares at 70 miles. And as was said before, the Air Force Base did claim responsibility for the Phoenix lights, as stated here by Captain Drew Sullins.
And they were dropping high-intensity flares that deploy on a little parachute and descend to the Earth. And we think that those flares were mistakenly called UFOs by the folks in the valley in Phoenix there.
Again, even if they were flares, they were dropped in a completely different location than was reported by eyewitnesses, spanning over 400 miles from Henderson, Nevada to Tucson, Arizona. The media at the time breezed over this fact entirely and only focused on this video in Phoenix. If, as some claim, the military deployed these flares so they could use them as an explanation for the first event, it worked beautifully. Because once the military claimed responsibility, that was all the public and the media needed to put the matter to rest, remaining ignorant of everything else that occurred before it. Depending on your biases, it's either easy or difficult to say what this video shows. What's undeniable, however, is that fundamentally it's a red herring, distracting from the first event. Because receiving one call of a V-shaped silent craft is odd. Receiving thousands is something else entirely.
To fly a craft, it wasn't even flying. How could something be lifted by air going that slow? Not possible.
It was huge, and it was at least a mile or two in diameter. I mean, the fucking thing was ginormous.
I saw 6 lights over the airport in absolute uniform in a V shape.
At the time, there was this house that was being constructed up on the hill, and there was a telephone pole, and the craft flew like right over the top.
Well, I saw a huge craft just kind of come right over Squaw Peak. That was, it was just breathtaking.
I mean, and it was silent. It made no noise.
There was no sound. Like, even in the neighborhood was really quiet.
He's actually out in the street running after this thing. That's how slow it was going. The kids thought it was going about 10 or 15 miles an hour.
Everybody said, oh, look at that. And we turned around, and this thing was coming from the northwest, traveling to the southeast.
Shaped, what I said at the time was like a carpenter square. It looked like a flying carpenter square.
Very interesting part looking back on it, and I especially was very, very intrigued and excited with the idea that this is something miraculous that's happening right now.
Absolutely perfect, under control, powerful, smooth, quiet.
And Tim and I were looking up into the light wells. I mean, these were circular light wells that we could not even estimate really how deep they were.
People approximately witnessed this, one of the largest experiences of this sort ever recorded.
The Phoenix Lights phenomena didn't seem to be falsifiable in any way. It was being validated by most everybody that saw it.
The entire object, it was a massive black object traveling very slow without any noise over I-10 on the Birch 15 right around 8:30.
Who knows where it came from? Inexplicable.
And it just kept going over our heads and going and going and going, and it seemed like we could actually just reach up and touch it.
It didn't make a sound. That's the point. It was there. We saw it. There's no doubt in our minds whatsoever what we saw.
Although it's difficult to believe, what happened next was arguably even more surprising.
So I went into the meeting and I said there were these reporters, a reporter outside and had asked some questions about these lights that went over Phoenix last March 13th, and could we find out what it was?
The council completely ignored her request for inquiry into the lights, and after the session ended, an assistant city manager walked up to Frances, telling her she shouldn't have asked that question. As word got out that a local councilwoman was curious about the Phoenix lights, she was mocked by the press, But as a result of her new exposure, thousands of calls flooded her office and home, with people wishing to speak with her about their experience of the event. Frances Barwood became the go-to person for the public to give information to regarding the Phoenix Lights. She received a phone call from a man named Richard Curtis, a man who claimed he was a disabled veteran and high-end videographer, who said he had video that showed the outline of the craft in detail.
But from what he said, his video showed an outline of the craft because the city lights reflected up. And he said too, it was murky, but he could see the outline. He was so excited, I really didn't want to push him on much of anything. So I told him, could you make a copy?
But after 2 weeks, Richard called her back to ask what she thought of the video.
And he called me at home again, and he asked what I thought of the video. I said I never got it. And when did he send it? He said he didn't, but was going to get copies made. He was on the way to get copies made when 2 men turned up at his door, and they said that they came for the videos for Barwood. He asked them, "Are you from her office?" And they said yes. And I said to him, "Well, I don't have any men in my office. I just had 3 women." They told him they were going to bring back his original because he hadn't made the copies yet.
Frances went back into her old recordings and was able to get Richard's address from it. Her friends went to Richard's address, and as it turns out, the characteristics and hobbies he stated checked out.
Richard did live at the Westwood Hole. He was a disabled veteran. He did have professional CB and video equipment. And then it got more interesting. The manager of the hotel saw a black car pull up, and 2 men in 3-piece black suits got out, and both were wearing hats and sunglasses, and they went into the hotel, and he said they looked identical. And then the next person who saw him was the minister who counseled with the residents at the hotel, and they asked him where Richard Curtis's apartment was, and went up. Neither of them remember them coming down or leaving, but the car was gone. The last I heard, they changed his medication, and he had a bad reaction, and he was taken away, and nobody knows where he is now.
Later on, Frances started to notice that her phone was acting up and called the phone company to see what was wrong with it.
And he checked inside, then he went outside and he checked along the line. And when he came back, he would not come in the house. And he went to the window and he said, I want to tell you that there is a tap on your line, but it's not local. It's in the central office, which means it's government. And you didn't hear that from me. And he did not want to come in the house at all, and he left.
Many UFO events seem to habitually occupy certain themes of secrecy and awe. There's something to them that I think is significant and worth paying attention to, because just what the hell happened that night in Arizona? And if Frances's story is true, why did 2 men in black suits find the video and take it? And who were the people who bugged her phone? And if the military did deploy the flares, why do something like that while the entire state is already in a frenzy? Is the craft, as some claim, a secret government project? And if it is, why fly it over Phoenix? And who was inside of it? I have no idea how to answer those questions. To call this case mysterious really is an understatement, and what I would have given to have been there and seen it for myself, whether I'd been unimpressed or completely transfixed, remains to be seen. What's certain is that an agnostic battle of skepticism versus openness fights inside my mind about all this stuff. I simply cannot claim to know something I don't know about, but I simultaneously am in awe of the witnesses' statements. The only place I can rightfully stand is in the showing, which is why I've shown all this to you.
That is really the pinnacle. That there's another civilization in existence that's intelligent, that we know about, and we actually have artifacts from them that can operate.
This video is a collaborative project with The Orchard, a media company that recently distributed Jeremy Corbell's new film, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. I've been allowed to use their footage, and there are no restrictions on what I can say. This was crucial, as my thoughts on Lazar sometimes differ than those presented in Corbell's documentary. By the end of this video, I hope to have carefully represented those who are convinced Lazar is telling the truth, and also those who believe he's constructed one of the most popular fabrications of the 21st century.
And quite frankly, I could make up a better lie, but I have no motivation to lie. There are some things I can say that will bolster the case, and I'm not going to. It's going to stay that way.
When you hear an argument against Lazar, a bar will show up at the bottom of the screen, the color red. When you hear an argument for Lazar, the same bar will show up but in the color blue. My opinion is not represented by either the red or blue bar, as I won't be giving my actual opinion until the final scene. Try and think of yourself as part of a jury, and it's my job to represent both the defense and the prosecutor. Let's start at the beginning.
However, the science and the technology can change us dramatically. It can change the way the entire world operates, the economy, everything.
Robert Scott Lazar, or Bob Lazar, claims he worked on the back engineering of alien spacecraft at a base near Area 51 called S4. Bob says he attained a master's degree in physics from MIT, and also a master's degree in technology from Caltech. But there's zero evidence for this.
I checked at MIT, I checked at Caltech, neither one ever heard of them.
If Lazar is telling the truth, how come there's no evidence of his stated educational background? This discrepancy alone is sufficient proof that he's lying. Why should I believe anything else he says when MIT and Caltech continually refute Bob had anything to do with them? There are many possible reasons for this. In his attempt to locate Bob's alleged master thesis, John Andrews, a principal designer for the Testers Company, sent out multiple inquiries to different institutions. After some time passed, a response finally came from John Orth, Special Projects, who said, "I cannot imagine that MIT cannot find it," which suggests that perhaps the thesis was done on a security classified project, and the thesis itself is classified. Is it possible that Lazar's thesis was made classified? But even if that were true, which I don't think it is, it still wouldn't explain why he wasn't in their yearbook. Now you have to assume the government invited themselves into every household of the same class and magically made Lazar's pictures disappear. But you're assuming he took a yearbook picture at all. Physicist Dr. Robert Kringle, the man responsible for inventing the laser rangefinder that is now used in police traffic radar units, says he attended security meetings with Lazar at Los Alamos and had this to say about the yearbook debacle.
You know, that's for undergrads. You know, the class of, you know, the class of 70, the class of 71. That's an undergrad getting your bachelor. When you're up there getting a graduate degree, you're not like with a class.
So like a master's or something?
Right.
Really?
Right. You're
Okay.
in there as you're in there as an independent. There's not like a class of 70 for your masters.
But this is just one random person saying things. Plenty of people who are getting their masters can be found inside of a yearbook, and you still haven't brought up Caltech. They also have no records of his involvement. How do you move around that? During George Knapp's investigation into Lazar's background, he discovered that multiple people who knew Lazar stated that Bob did in fact attend Caltech.
Jim Taliani, for one, who said that, yeah, Bob went to Caltech back then. I dropped him off. I interviewed another person who also knew Bob then and said that he would drop him off at Caltech, would pick him up from the library, that if he wasn't going to school there, he sure was making a good show of it back then.
The credibility of George Knapp is zero. He's a conspiracy theorist who has a vested interest in maintaining Lazar's credibility because he is the one who broke the story. How embarrassing would it be for him if his biggest story was a flop? Notice how Knapp responds when he reflects on the past, when he found out Bob was being convicted of pandering for a brothel.
And when he told me about it, I thought, oh my gosh, my professional life is flashing before my eyes here. The most high-profile witness and the biggest story I've ever done.
This is not the sound of a man pursuing truth. but of a man only interested in maintaining his reputation as a journalist. But a person can be interested in what's true and also their reputation. But the credibility of Knapp, which I would argue is very good, is not the point. If Lazar is lying, why did Los Alamos Laboratory deny he ever worked there, even after being presented proof that he worked there?
They were either mistaken or were lying. A 1982 phone book from the lab lists Lazar right there among the other scientists and technicians.
Los Alamos denies I've ever worked there, as does Kirkmeyer, even the subcontractor for Los Alamos, which is interesting. We went back and were able to dig up an inter-lab directory phone book with my name in it. Certainly I got some of my colleagues from Los Alamos to verify that I worked there, but for the most part, Los Alamos has kept everything pretty quiet and even denies that I ever lived in the town, though I'm known by many people in the town and many of the people I worked with, supervisors, so on and so forth.
How do you explain the Los Alamos Monitor, a newspaper profiling Lazar's interest in jet cars, referring to him as a physicist from Los Alamos? Could the newspaper be mistaken? It's possible. But again, even physicist Dr. Robert Kringle recently came forward stating he worked with Lazar at Los Alamos.
You did know that he was a physicist.
Yes.
And that was very clear to you, that he was a physicist at Los Alamos and not, again, like the janitor.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
During Robert's trial for creating a computer program for the brothel, the judge encountered the same difficulties, unable to attain any significant information on Lazar at all.
It's obvious that it's very difficult to get information on Mr. Lazar from government sources, enormously difficult.
All of this suggests that aspects of Lazar's history have been tampered with or erased, and if you can do it at Los Alamos, you can do it somewhere else.
Doesn't have the credentials. That was a number of other issues, his educational background.
He finished in the bottom third of his high school class. You can't get into MIT if you're outside usually the top 10, 15, 20% of your class. Bottom third, never.
But Lazar's name on the laboratory directory doesn't mean anything substantial. He could have worked there part-time as a subcontractor. It could also be a completely different Robert Lazar. And as you said, it's possible the newspaper could have made a mistake. But what's even more likely is that Lazar lied to them too. And even if he did work at Los Alamos, which he probably didn't, his name on a directory doesn't prove his supposed Q clearance, or what he later calls majestic clearance, something that doesn't exist. It's also obvious that the judge can't find any government-sourced information on Lazar because he's never actually worked for the government. Same with their inability to find his records at MIT and Caltech. But if he didn't go to MIT or Caltech, how was he able to work at Los Alamos, one of the most expensive comprehensive laboratories in the United States? Will they allow someone to work on the equipment who had no professional expertise?
Do you think Los Alamos just hired me out of high school? If you don't think that's possible, then something had to happen in between. I don't understand how everybody gets so caught up in the minutia, because you can debate that stuff forever. We can go back before MIT, and you can start fighting whether or not and where I lived in high school. That is not going to translate into answering the questions and the things that I've brought into the public eye. That's the important stuff. It almost seems like this is an intentional distraction.
If Lazar is lying, how is he able to know that on Wednesday night at Papoose Lake, test flights were being conducted of the alleged craft?
Look how bright it's getting. Look at it now.
The time when Bob said there would be a test, there was a strange light jumping around in the sky above the location where he said it would be at the time and date he said it would be.
If this video isn't fake, it's likely footage of Janet Airlines flights, which John Lear, Bob's good friend at the time, would know about given his obsessions with observing the base. No planes could fly over Papoose Lake as it was restricted airspace. Secondly, when the video is enhanced, it holds a shape that looks nothing like the dimensions of a jet. Is it just a coincidence? The object appears to hold the same shape Lazar purported to be working on.
This is the first time there's a craft it's a reactionless craft. It's a field propulsion craft. And what it does is it creates a distortion in space and time in front of it, where space actually bends. And my analogy to that has always been, put a bowling ball in the middle of your bed, and then a foot in front of it, take your fist and push down on the mattress. The bowling ball will roll towards it. And that's exactly how the craft works. It creates a distortion right in front of it, and the craft falls forward.
The object is so far away. How can we be sure that a jet would look like a jet if the recording is of an object miles away?
Here, hold on, right here.
Combined with Lazar's lack of verifiable credentials, his claims about Element 115 are arguably the bombshells which prove he's lying. Contrary to what many claim, Element 115 was not, quote, discovered by Bob Lazar. Articles of the element were floating around Scientific American months before Bob made his claims, and beyond that, the element has none of the functional characteristics Bob claimed. But that doesn't mean we dismiss any chance of Element 115 being stabilized in the future. Methods exist that could eventually lead to a stabilized version of Element 115.
So I called some of the top heavy element physicists on the planet, 3 in particular who would really talk to me in depth about it. All of them, across the board, said you cannot rule out a stabilized version of Element 115.
If Bob is telling the truth, why hasn't he gotten cancer or become sick from working at S4, an area whose east end was the location of multiple atomic tests? The government would never have scientists work for them in an environment that could get them sick. Yes, they would. In an article from the Washington Post, Area 51, Secrets Under the Sun, the author revealed the death of Wally Casa, a sheet metal worker who worked for decades in different departments surrounding the Nevada test site, including Area 51. His death was purported to be the result of radiation. These men worked in far worse conditions than anything Lazar claims to have participated in. Workers said they labored in thick, choking clouds of poisonous smoke as hazardous wastes were burned in huge open trenches on the site.
What is it that you think is most misunderstood?
That he really is an honest guy. You know, he doesn't make stuff up.
If Bob is lying, how is he able to pass every polygraph test he's ever taken? Well, there's a reason polygraph tests aren't allowed in court of law. According to the American Psychological Association, the idea that we can detect a person's veracity by monitoring psychophysiological changes is more myth than reality. This is because an honest person could feel anxious and score a lie, while an intentional deceiver could exude no physical characteristics of anxiousness at all.
I don't know, I guess the point is, do I really care what people I don't know think? And probably to some extent I do, but I don't dwell on it.
Most who believe Lazar often point to his supposed W-2 as proof he worked for the Department of Naval Intelligence, a department that doesn't exist, by the way. It's the Office of Naval Intelligence. But a simple search of the stated employee identification number pulls up nothing. Yet another example of how Lazar's story falls apart under the least bit of investigation. But that fails to consider something important. If an agency is operating outside the purview of the government, it must ensure the distortion of any documentation that is given to the public, at least where it matters. To give you one point of contact, consider the majestic clearance documents in the FBI files, all written over with the word bogus. The reason the FBI gives for dismissing the veracity of these documents, which was an alleged group dedicated to researching UFOs, was the inconsistencies found in the language that was used. But what better way is there to ensure the secrecy of a project than by creating documents that officials who were outside the need to know would view as a hoax?
There's nothing to hide. There's nothing to hide at all.
The big thing is the suppression of extremely advanced technology and the suppression of unknown science.
Consider for a moment that this man, Jerry Freeman, traveled to the exact area where Lazar's alleged S4 base was supposed to be located. And as is demonstrated by this picture, nothing is there. He then died 2 years later, allegedly from radiation poisoning, another telling sign that anyone near S4 is right on top of fatal radiation levels. If Lazar is telling the truth, how come when the Greenpeace organization successfully held a demonstration at Papoose Lake, they reported there was no top-secret installation of any kind? Both Jerry Freeman and the Greenpeace demonstration traveled near S4 years after Lazar went public. Given the volume of citizens flocking to S4's borders mere days after Lazar came forward, it makes perfect sense why the installation would be removed. But even if it wasn't removed, the base was built into natural infrastructure for the precise reason that the perimeter wouldn't be seen. It's also pure conjecture that Jerry died from radiation poisoning. But if it was from high rates of radiation, which it probably wasn't, one has to also mention that he hiked the entire Nevada test site for days. But ultimately, if the area was so toxic, wouldn't everyone present for the Greenpeace demonstration have died too? Yet they didn't. This rules out the radiation argument. It certainly rules out any comparison between the actions Jerry Freeman took in the brief time Lazar was at S4. Every time I feel I have a firm grasp on this story, I'm given reason to doubt it. The truth is, the endless arguing you heard is what appears in my mind while dissecting Bob Lazar. I'll become convinced that he's lying and live through that reality, astonished at how one man could lie with such an apparent lack of empathy or concern for the world. Then it'll switch, realizing how prevalent sightings of flying saucers were through the 50s and the 80s, and knowing that the idea of flying saucers wasn't a media or Hollywood invention first, as those creative endeavors occurred as a result of the waves of sightings that happened before it. Of course, most reports were benign, but others were not. Although many hyperbolize the government's ability to erase a person's background, it's not inconceivable, but it is improbable. And it's one reason why I sometimes lean more to the side of not believing parts of a story. But then I reflect on the test flights, and not just that Bob knew the time and place, which could be explained away by linking that information to John Lear, and not just that when the object is enhanced, it looks like the object Lazar claims to have worked on, although that is pretty substantial. It's the fact that the object isn't blinking on and off. I've yet to hear anyone bring this up. Videos of planes or jets flying at night, and you can film them and see for yourself. They just kind of look like a blinking light in a black sky. And although you might see a set of 3 or 4 lights remain constant, you'll still see a set of additional blinking lights going on and off every second or two. But this object has no blinking lights. I stabilized the footage and slowed it down by 50%, and as you can see, where are the blinking navigation lights, or the red and green navigation lights? It just looks like a solid light, whatever it is. And if you think this object is too far away to analyze, then I think it's safe to say that you and I have hit a stalemate. So while I currently struggle to completely grant certain aspects of Bob's story, there are also far too many factors that make his case impossible to dismiss. I've heard all the arguments and steelman them in my head constantly in an attempt to know what's true, but it's difficult